To many Americans over the age of 35, the word Waco doesn't just name a place, it ignites a reaction. For some, it conjures images of government overreach, tanks rolling across Texas soil, agents and gas masks, flames rising in the background. For others, it evokes the terrifying potential of cults and religious extremism. From February 28th to April 19th, 1993, the nation was fixated on a rural compound outside Waco, Texas. Americans watched as David Koresh, a leader of a religious sect known as the Branch Davidians, defied the federal government in a standoff that began with gunfire and ended in an inferno. On April 19th, tanks smashed into the Mount Carmel compound. CS gas was deployed, and by the end of the day, 76 Davidians, including 19 children, were dead. Some burned, some suffocated, 2 were unborn. What remained was ash, smoke, and a nation grappling with horror. But the road to Waco didn't begin with violence. It began with a boy named Vernon Howell. I'm Rick Welch, and this is Prophet of Fire. The man the world came to know as David Koresh was born Vernon Wayne Howell on August 17, 1959, in Houston, Texas. His mother, Bonnie Sue Clark, was just 14 years old. His father, Bobby Wayne Howell, was 20. The two never married, and by the time Vernon turned 2, their relationship had already fallen apart. Bonnie's life quickly spiraled into instability. She married a man named Joe Golden, but that relationship was abusive and ended in divorce. Around 1962, overwhelmed and unable to cope, she moved to Dallas, leaving Vernon in the care of her mother and older sister. During this time, Vernon was told his grandmother was his mother and that Bonnie was simply his aunt. In 1964, Bonnie married a merchant marine named Roy Haldeman. With new stability in her life, she brought Vernon back home, but that meant telling the 5-year-old boy the truth. The woman he thought was his aunt was in fact his mother. Vernon would carry the trauma of that revelation with him for the rest of his life. According to Koresh, this was also when another trauma began. He later alleged that he was sexually abused by a male relative of his mother. In July 1965, a new half-brother, Roger, was born. Shortly after, the Haldeman family moved to Richardson, Texas. While Vernon and Roger reportedly got along well, tensions between Vernon and his stepfather were constant and unresolved. Koresh described his early childhood as lonely. He struggled in school, not just socially, but academically. He had difficulty reading, poor eyesight, and what would likely be diagnosed today as dyslexia. He was placed in special education and given a cruel nickname by classmates, Mr. Retardo. Quote, "I stopped in my tracks when I heard it," end quote, Koresh would later say. Despite these challenges, Vernon Howell showed promise in 2 very different areas, mechanics and scripture. When his mother gave him a radio, he took it apart to see how it worked. As he got older, he became fascinated by cars. He even found and repaired an old guitar from a barn, igniting a lifelong passion for music. But it was the Bible that truly consumed him. Raised in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Howell became obsessed with Scripture. He listened to sermons, read Christian literature, and tried to interpret prophecy on his own. While other teenagers partied, Vernon was poring over Revelation and Isaiah. His devotion was intense, even isolating, but it also laid the groundwork for a spiritual worldview that would come to define him and his followers. At around age 19, Howell entered a relationship with a 16-year-old girl who became pregnant. The girl's family, believing he was unfit to be a father, moved away and cut off all contact. Howell never met the child. Shortly afterward, he claimed to have been born again in the Southern Baptist Church, but it wasn't long before he returned to the church of his upbringing, rejoining the Seventh-day Adventist congregation. At age 20, he began dating 15-year-old Sandy Berlin, the daughter of a church pastor. The relationship lasted 2 years. During that time, Howell believed God had spoken to him, literally. One day, while praying, he opened his Bible to Isaiah 34:16 and read, quote, "None should want for her mate," end quote. He believed this was a divine message. Sandy was meant to be his wife. Howell told the pastor his intentions. The man was horrified. He forbid Howell from ever speaking to his daughter again. Howell ignored the command. The congregation, increasingly disturbed by his behavior and sexual obsession, expelled him. By summer 1981, Vernon Howell was out of work, out of favor, and running out of options. So he headed for Waco, Texas, to a remote religious compound called Mount Carmel. Mount Carmel was the home of the Branch Davidians, a splinter group of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists. Founded by Benjamin Rodin in the 1950s, the group had passed leadership to his wife, Lois Rodin, following his death in 1978. Lois was in her 60s when Howell arrived. He was 21. What he lacked in theological credentials, he made up for in raw passion. He immersed himself in study and soon began preaching. His style was strikingly different from other Adventist preachers. Howell wore jeans, t-shirts, sweatpants. He spoke plainly, emotionally, and often with a rough edge. One of his sermons compared sin to a booger on your finger. Quote, "You're driving down the road at 50 miles an hour, trying to flick it off, and it just keeps sticking to your other finger. I know what I'm talking about. You see?" End quote. It was crass, but relatable. And to many listeners, especially the outsiders, the former addicts, and the broken, Howell's words felt more real than anything they'd heard from a pulpit. He called himself a sinner too, a, quote, blemished sacrificial goat, end quote. One of his closest followers, Livingston Fagan, later said, quote, "When you criticize David for something he did, you are really only criticizing yourself," end quote. The message clicked. Howell attracted followers not just from Texas, but from all walks of life. Race, nationality, and background didn't matter. He spoke to anyone who would listen, and once they listened, many never left. As Howell's following grew, so did his confidence. He studied the book of Revelation obsessively and began to speak of a coming messianic figure, the Lamb who would open the 7 seals. At first, he preached about that figure, but soon it became clear. He believed that figure was him. He married Rachel Jones, a teenage member of the group. Her father, Perry Jones, became one of Howell's strongest allies. Their union gave him both a personal and political foothold within Mount Carmel. With Lois Rodin's support, he began to teach his own interpretations, ones that diverged from traditional Adventist theology. He claimed to be receiving visions, new messages, prophetic insight, but not everyone was convinced. Lois's son, George Rodin, believed he was the rightful successor. It would escalate over the next few years into threats, gunfire, and ultimately, death. But at this point, Vernon Howell was well on his way to becoming someone else entirely. A new identity was forming, one that drew from ancient prophecy, royal bloodlines, and divine destiny. In the next episode, we will see how Vernon Howell transformed into a leader that challenges others for authority. He ultimately is driven out of Mount Carmel and lives in exile, but during that time, he builds a global following from Australia to the United Kingdom. And when he returns, it's not with questions. It's with guns, a resurrection contest, a shootout, and a name change that signals his ultimate transformation. I'm Rick Welch, and this is Prophet of Fire.